In the mid-2010s, a professor stepped away from his quiet academic life to confront an ideological firestorm, launching a global movement built on the fundamental necessity of truth.
That professor, Dr. Jordan B. Peterson. And you see, the global movement he kicked off wasn't really about politics or power in the way we usually think about it. No, it was about something way more fundamental, a personal rule for looking the chaos of life right in the eye and wrestling some meaning out of it. So today, we're going to deconstruct that very rule. It's a systematic, rigorous way to get your own psychological house in order. Let's pull it apart, piece by piece.
So here's our game plan for understanding this thing. We're going to start with the one moment that basically threw him onto the world stage. Then we'll dig into the intellectual fights that really built his worldview. We'll lay out his philosophy of order as a kind of moral code, break down the 2 practical systems he designed to master yourself, look at his legacy, and then at the end, figure out how you can actually use this rule to find meaning in your own life.
All right, so let's jump right in where his public story really began. The moment that took Jordan Peterson from a pretty unknown clinical psychologist to a global figure, well, it wasn't some big scientific paper. It was a moral stand. It was him drawing a line in the sand. The flashpoint was this piece of Canadian legislation, Bill C-16. Peterson went public and said he would flat out refuse to follow what he saw as a legal mandate to use specific pronouns. Now for him, this wasn't about being disrespectful, it was about a much, much deeper principle that cut right to the heart of his life's work as a psychologist.
And this right here gets to the absolute core of the conflict. For Peterson, this wasn't just some political squabble, it was deeply psychological. His core belief, built over decades in his clinical practice, was that when you force people to say words they don't believe are true, you're corrupting them in a really profound way. It's like it messes with their connection to reality, and ultimately it makes their own mind unstable.
And that brings us to the bedrock of his entire philosophy. Seriously, this is it. His public stand was just the outward sign of his deepest psychological belief, that you have to aggressively defend the truth if you want to fight off chaos in your own life and in society. For Peterson, lying, even just a little bit, or being forced to say something untrue, it's like installing a virus on your own computer. It just creates glitches, weakens your integrity, and in the end, it makes you incredibly fragile when life inevitably gets hard.
Okay, so you might be asking, where did this intense, almost obsessive focus on order and truth even come from? Well, to really get Peterson's core rule for life, we have to go back and look at the deep, personal, and historical struggles that basically forged this philosophy. This thing wasn't born in an ivory tower, it was hammered into shape in the face of some serious darkness.
So here's how his thinking developed. Early in his career, Peterson got absolutely obsessed with understanding the horrors of the 20th century. We're talking the gulags, the concentration camps, the ideologies that killed tens of millions of people. And his main takeaway was chillingly simple. These societal hellscapes weren't just created by a few evil dictators. They were built on the choices of millions of ordinary people who gave up their individual responsibility. People who chose to lie or just look the other way. That historical terror, well, that became the starting point for his entire philosophy.
And this really shows the huge battle that was going on in his mind. On one side, you've got the void, this feeling of nihilism, of meaninglessness, that he saw as the default setting for the modern world. And on the other side, the only defense possible, a radical, full-on acceptance of individual responsibility. He realized that blaming society, or the system, just leads to the same resentment and suffering he'd studied in history. The only way forward, the only moral way, was for each person to create their own meaning by picking up their own burden.
And that leads us to probably his most famous, and yeah, his most misunderstood piece of advice. This quote has almost nothing to do with being tidy. It's a deep moral requirement that came straight out of his intellectual journey. It's the practical first step in fighting back against that void. It basically means before you even think about trying to fix the world, you better have the discipline to bring order to your own little corner of it first. You have to prove to yourself more than anyone that you can actually create order from chaos, even on a small scale.
Okay, so we've got the defining moment, we've got the intellectual backstory, now we're getting to the absolute heart of it, the philosophy itself. And let's be clear, this is not a list of gentle, feel-good suggestions. It's a demanding moral code. It's an aggressive take on voluntary self-improvement. The argument is that life involves suffering, and the only way to make it bearable is to consciously, voluntarily force some structure and order onto it.
This moral code really rests on 3 big pillars that give it all its structure. First, the non-negotiable need for truth. Second, making the conscious choice to go after what is meaningful instead of what's just easy or expedient. And third, the physical way you carry yourself, which he famously explained using something he calls lobster logic.
The first pillar, truth, is the foundation for everything else. As we've already seen, for Peterson, telling the truth isn't just about being a good person, it's a matter of survival. Every single time you lie, you actually warp your own perception of reality. You build this fragile, fake version of yourself that's terrified of being found out. But the truth aligns what you say and do with reality itself. It makes you solid. It makes you resilient. It literally holds together the psychological structure that you need to function.
That brings us to pillar number 2, a fundamental choice you have to make every day. You can choose expedience, which is the easy path. Cutting corners, telling little white lies, chasing whatever feels good in the moment. It might give you a temporary boost, but it builds a weak and meaningless future. Or you can choose meaning, and that means voluntarily picking up responsibility. It means having that difficult conversation, doing the hard work, facing the truth. It doesn't always feel good, but it's the only path that builds a life with any real substance or purpose.
And now for the third pillar, which is summed up perfectly in his very first rule. He uses this wild analogy about lobsters. Turns out their nervous systems are super sensitive to social hierarchy, and their brain chemistry is surprisingly similar to ours. A lobster that wins a fight gets a surge of serotonin and stands up tall and confident. A defeated one slumps. He argues we're wired the same way. Standing up straight is literally a physical signal to your own brain that you're ready and willing to face the world's challenges. It's a feedback loop that says, I'm ready to carry the burden of being alive.
Okay, so the philosophy makes sense, right? A moral code built on truth, meaning, and responsibility. But the big question is, how do you actually live this stuff? This is where Peterson switches from abstract ideas to concrete, hands-on systems. This is the how-to manual for creating order in your life.
He breaks it down into a 2-part system for getting a grip on yourself. One system is for bringing order to your internal, psychological world, your mind. The other is for bringing order to your external, physical world. And the idea is that these 2 systems work together to make responsibility a daily habit.
So, the system for your inner world is called the self-authoring program. It's basically a series of structured writing exercises, and the idea behind it is really powerful. See, our minds are constantly telling us stories to make sense of everything. A lot of our anxiety and past trauma is just a poorly written, chaotic story. By methodically writing things out, structuring your past, analyzing your present, and designing your future, you become the author of your own life story. You turn that vague, floating anxiety into an ordered plan for a better life.
Now, the system for your outer world is really just the daily practice of this quote. It's a promise you make to yourself to bring order to the things that are directly under your control, right here and right now. It's the antidote to that feeling of being totally overwhelmed by all the huge, complex problems in the world that, let's be honest, you probably can't fix. This grounds you in the real, tangible stuff in your own life.
And where does it all start? With this incredibly simple, almost funny command: clean your room. Why? Because your room is probably the smallest domain you can totally control. When you bring perfect order to that one little space, you're proving to your own nervous system that you are an agent of order, not chaos. Every little win builds your confidence and your belief that you can actually make a difference. It's the very first step on a heroic path to taking on bigger and bigger responsibilities.
So you take this really demanding philosophy, you add these super practical, hands-on systems, and what do you get? A full-blown global phenomenon. So let's take a look at the impact and the legacy of this whole approach, both for Peterson himself and for the millions of people who took on his framework for living.
And look, this isn't just a bunch of nice-sounding ideas. His systems have produced real, measurable results. Academic studies on that self-authoring program showed some amazing success. For certain groups of students, especially young men, finishing the program led to way better grades and a drop in university dropout rates by as much as 25%. That's hard data that shows when people create an ordered story for their lives, their performance in the real world gets dramatically better.
So at the end of the day, his legacy is really about transformation. Yeah, he transformed himself from a quiet academic into a global figure. But more importantly, he took all this complex wisdom from psychology, philosophy, even mythology, and he turned it into a clear, accessible blueprint for taking personal responsibility. Through things like his 12 rules for life, he kind of democratized a form of tough love psychology. He gave a path to people who felt lost and were just desperate for a way to find meaning.
Okay, so we've covered the man, the philosophy, and the legacy. Now let's bring it all home. How does any of this apply to you right now? How can you actually use this framework to find some order in the middle of your own personal chaos?
The very first step is to ask yourself a simple but really profound question, and take a second to be honest with yourself. Where in my life is there chaos? Is it in my relationships, my health, my job, my finances? Maybe it's just in my own head. You have to identify the dragon before you can slay it. You've got to find the chaos before you can bring the order.
The path forward is the one we've just laid out. It's his whole philosophy boiled down into 3 actionable steps. Start with number 1, master your smallest domain. Don't try to fix your whole life at once. Clean your room, make your bed, organize one shelf. Prove to yourself you can do it locally. Then step 2, write your own story. Get clear on where you've been, who you are now, and who you want to be. And finally, step 3, embrace the responsibility. Don't see it as a chore, see it as a moral duty. You have to understand that voluntarily picking up the burden of life is the only way to find meaning. At his core, Jordan Peterson is a man who dedicated his entire life to one big idea, that we have to heroically confront the chaos of just being alive. And his greatest achievement was maybe transforming the heavy weight of responsibility into the profound gift of meaning. His framework is a map for anyone to find order in their own chaos. And perhaps the most powerful takeaway from all of this is right here in this final quote. That thing you're avoiding, that difficult task you keep putting off, that truth you're afraid to say, that is exactly where the meaning you're looking for is hiding.